My name is Oksana Petrenko, and I am 34 years old. 2 years ago, I was a structural engineer working on apartment renovations in Kharkiv, focused on making old Soviet buildings safer and more comfortable for families. Today, I lead a team of 8 volunteer rescue workers who crawl through collapsed buildings daily to find survivors, trapped beneath tons of concrete and steel across eastern Ukraine. My blueprints have been replaced by emergency detection equipment and the toolkit designed to navigate through the most dangerous rubble zones. I was born in Mariupol, near the Azov Sea. My father was a construction foreman, my mother a nurse. They taught me that buildings should protect people, not become their tombs. Growing up in a city built on industry and resilience, I learned early that when disaster strikes, neighbors help neighbors, not just with words, but with their hands and their lives. After graduating with my engineering degree from Kharkiv National University, I started my own renovation company specializing in earthquake-resistant retrofitting. My work was methodical, safe, scheduled inspections, controlled demolitions, gradual improvements over months of careful planning. I thought I understood how buildings fail. February 24th, 2022 changed everything. Was reviewing blueprints in my Kharkiv office when the first explosions shook the city. My phone buzzed with emergency alerts, air raid sirens wailed outside, family members calling to check if I was safe. But one call made my blood freeze, my sister Natalia, sobbing from Izium. Oksana, a missile hit the Metro school. The building collapsed. Children are trapped inside, including my 8-year-old son, Maxim. The rescue teams say it's too dangerous to enter. Please, you know buildings, can you help? I grabbed my emergency kit and drove east through military checkpoints and artillery fire. The highway was cratered from rocket strikes, forcing detours through farm roads where unexploded shells lay scattered like deadly seeds. Every few kilometers, I'd shelter in roadside ditches while fighter jets screamed overhead. Izium was devastated. Half the city lay in ruins, smoke rising from dozens of impact sites. I found Natalia at the school collapse site, where local emergency workers stood helplessly before a mountain of twisted concrete and steel. The structure is too unstable, the fire chief explained. One wrong move and the whole thing comes down. We've called for heavy equipment from Poltava, but it won't arrive for hours. I studied the wreckage with an engineer's eye. The Soviet-era building had pancaked, floors compressed into layers with small void spaces between concrete slabs. If children were alive in those pockets, they had maybe 6 hours before dust inhalation or compression injuries became fatal. There, I pointed to a gap near where the stairwell had been. The structural support beams create a tunnel. It's narrow but stable. Someone small could crawl through. Too dangerous, the chief shook his head. We can't risk more casualties. I looked at Natalia's desperate face, thought of Maxim and his classmates trapped in darkness. I'm going in. Before anyone could stop me, I wriggled into the gap. The space was barely 60 centimeters high, filled with dust and the smell of pulverized concrete. I crawled forward using my phone's flashlight, testing each surface for stability. 20 meters in, I heard it, a child's whimper. Hello? Can you hear me? My name is Oksana. I'm here to help. A weak voice answered. Please help us. Maxim is hurt and we can't move. I found them in a classroom that had become a cave, concrete slabs overhead supported by a collapsed doorframe. 4 children huddled together, Maxim with a broken arm, 9-year-old Anya with a head injury, 7-year-old Petro trapped under a desk, and 10-year-old Sonia who'd been shielding the others. The rescue took 3 hours. I had to enlarge the tunnel, removing debris piece by piece while calculating load distribution to prevent total collapse. Other volunteers formed a human chain, passing out Rubble and passing in medical supplies. Petro was the most critical, pinned by a concrete beam that I couldn't move without specialized equipment. I stayed with him while others were evacuated, talking constantly to keep him conscious as rescue workers outside prepared hydraulic jacks. When we finally pulled Petro free, barely breathing but alive, I realized this wasn't an isolated incident. Across Ukraine, schools, hospitals, and apartment buildings were being targeted. Children were dying in structures that should have protected them. That night, I called my engineering school classmate Andriy Kovalenko, who worked in Kramatorsk. Andriy, I need help. Buildings are collapsing with people inside, and rescue teams don't have structural expertise. I'll be there tomorrow, he said immediately. Within a week, we'd assembled an informal team. Andriy brought knowledge of Soviet construction techniques. Tatiana Marchenko, a geology graduate from Dnipro, understood soil dynamics under bombardment. Viktor Shevchenko, recently retired from construction work, had decades of hands-on experience reading structural failure patterns. We called ourselves angels in the rubble, specialists who could assess collapse sites and guide rescue operations when traditional methods weren't enough. Our first major case was in Chuiv, where a precision missile strike had destroyed a 5-story apartment building during evening dinner time. 43 people were missing, including entire families. The building had collapsed asymmetrically, the eastern wing pancaked completely, while the western section tilted precariously against neighboring structures. Traditional rescue equipment was useless. Heavy machinery would destabilize the remaining structure. I identified 3 potential entry points where building codes had created reinforced spaces. Andriy calculated weight distribution to map safe crawling routes. Tatiana analyzed soil stability to predict secondary collapses. We worked in 4-hour shifts, crawling through spaces barely wide enough for human bodies, following sounds and trapped air currents that indicated survivor pockets. The work was exhausting. Every movement had to be planned, every breath rationed in dust-filled passages. On the second day, we found the Bondarenko family, parents and 2 children alive in their bathroom, which had been reinforced for plumbing and had become a survival shelter. The rescue took 8 hours of careful excavation, creating a tunnel system that wouldn't compromise the remaining structure. Word spread quickly through military and civilian networks. Emergency coordinators started calling us directly when standard rescue operations reached their limits. We developed portable assessment kits, structural analysis tools, soil testing equipment, communication devices that worked through concrete barriers. Our most challenging case came in Sloviansk, where apartment complex had been hit during morning rush hour. The building's central core had twisted during collapse, creating a spiral maze of void spaces where voices echoed from multiple directions. Traditional search methods, calling and listening, became unreliable because sound bounced unpredictably through the wreckage. We had to map the internal structure using architectural knowledge and debris patterns. I spent 14 hours inside that collapse zone, following a route that spiraled down through 5 floors of compressed building materials. The psychological pressure was enormous, crawling through spaces where walls could shift at any moment, knowing that rescue teams outside couldn't reach you if something went wrong. Found Maria Kachenko and her infant daughter in what had been a ground floor storage room. Maria had protected the baby for 2 days while buried alive, rationing water from a broken pipe and singing lullabies incomplete. Darkness stopped the extraction required, creating a relay system. 5 team members positioned along the route to pass the baby hand to hand through sections, too narrow for an adult carrying a child. Maria had to be removed separately after we'd widened passages. Using small tools and careful demolition, 6 months into the war, our team had participated in over 50 major rescues. But we realized that speed was critical. Survival rates dropped dramatically after the first 48 hours. We needed to reach collapse sites faster and work more efficiently. Victor had an idea. What if we pre-position near high-risk areas? Instead of traveling from Kharkiv after each attack, we stage equipment closer to likely targets. We established mobile base camps in Pokrovsk, Kramatorsk, and Lyman, cities close enough to Russian positions that they were regularly targeted, but with sufficient infrastructure to support our operations. Each base had structural assessment tools, communication equipment, and supplies for extended rescue operations. The strategy proved crucial during the Pokrovsk hospital bombing. We were on site within 20 minutes instead of hours, making the difference between life and death for patients trapped in the basement. Emergency ward. Our success attracted international attention. Rescue specialists from Turkey, Japan, and Mexico, countries experienced with earthquake response, reached out to study our techniques. But urban warfare rescue was different from natural disaster response. Earthquakes don't continue attacking while you work. The emotional toll was severe. Every successful rescue was shadowed by voices we couldn't reach in time. Andrew developed anxiety attacks after spending hours talking to a trapped child who died just before extraction. Tatiana struggled with survivor's guilt when families asked why we'd saved some people but not others. We instituted peer support protocols similar to military units. Daily debriefings focused on operational lessons rather than dwelling on losses. Mandatory rest periods prevented the hypervigilance that led to poor decision-making. We rotated team leadership to prevent any individual from carrying too much psychological weight, but the work also revealed extraordinary human resilience. In Bakhmut, we found 73-year-old Vasyl Kravchenko, who'd survived 5 days in a basement pocket, sharing his water with a trapped cat and maintaining hope by reciting poetry. In Avdiivka, teacher Lyudmila Moros had kept 7 children calm in a collapsed classroom by conducting lessons and games in the darkness. The most profound case was the Lysenko family in Kupiansk. When their apartment building was hit, 16-year-old Daria had shielded her 4-year-old brother Ilya in a reinforced closet. For 3 days, she'd rationed their shared chocolate bar, told stories, and convinced him they were playing hide-and-seek when I crawled through the debris to reach them. Daria's first words weren't about rescue. They were asking if her parents were okay. She'd spent 72 hours in mortal danger while protecting her brother and worrying about others. The rescue operation took 2 days. The building's collapse had created a complex puzzle of interlocked concrete slabs. Moving any piece risked triggering a secondary collapse that would crush the children. We had to work like surgeons, removing debris grain by grain while monitoring structural stability. International engineering teams studying our methods noted that we developed techniques that didn't exist in any textbook. Working inside active war zones required innovations that peacetime rescue operations never faced. 1 year into the war, our team had grown to 15 specialists. We'd participated in rescues that saved over 300 lives. Our mobile assessment protocols were being adopted by emergency services across Ukraine and shared with international disaster response organizations. But the war continued. New buildings collapsed daily. Families were still being buried alive by attacks targeting civilian infrastructure. The need for specialized rescue expertise only grew as Russian forces intensified bombardment of populated areas. Last month, I received a letter from 8-year-old Maxim, my nephew whose rescue had started this journey. He'd drawn a picture of our team pulling people from Rubble, with words written in careful second-grade handwriting. Thank you for bringing people home. The war isn't over. Buildings continue falling. Families remain trapped. But our team has proven that specialized knowledge can save lives even in the most impossible circumstances. That professional expertise must go where it's needed most, regardless of personal risk. Our most recent innovation came after the Dnipro apartment bombing, where 46 people died and dozens remain missing. We realized that Soviet-era buildings had predictable failure, patterns based on construction methods used in different decades. By studying architectural records, we could predict void spaces and survival zones before entering collapse sites. This analysis proved crucial in Kherson, where systematic bombing had destroyed residential areas with different building types from various construction periods. Our team can now assess multiple collapse sites simultaneously, prioritizing rescue efforts based on structural analysis rather than random searching. The children we've rescued often ask why we risk our lives for strangers. The answer is simple: because in war, everyone becomes family. Because specialized skills carry the responsibility to help when help is desperately needed. Because survival depends on people choosing to run toward danger instead of away from it. Tomorrow, we respond to new reports of collapsed buildings in Zaporizhia. Intelligence suggests coordinated strikes against residential areas, meaning multiple simultaneous rescues with limited personnel. It will be dangerous, exhausting work. Russian forces specifically target rescue workers. Buildings continue deteriorating hours after initial collapse. Some people will be beyond our reach, but we'll be there. A team of engineers and builders who chose to crawl through rubble because that's where families need us most. Because children deserve rescue regardless of circumstances. Because every life pulled from destruction proves that hope survives even the worst human cruelty. The equipment is loaded. Our team is ready. The families are waiting. We are angels in the rubble, and we dig toward voices in the darkness because that's where life calls to us strongest.